In this video, we are going to talk about creating commands and functions for your plugins. We are going to create some basic commands and functions, and then later we will expand upon this knowledge to create more complex commands and functions. In the last video, we created a basic command that alerts the user, "Hello world." Let's go ahead and delete that command and start fresh again. So just select it, press the delete key on your keyboard, and hit OK. Now this time I'm going to create a new command but explain in more detail what everything is. So let's go ahead and create a new class called alert. So I'm going to hit Shift F2 and type alert.cs. So this is going to be a command which alerts a message to the user. And the first thing that we need to do is bring in the Ubot plugin namespace. So let's go ahead and type using Ubot plugin. And now that we have the Ubot plugin namespace, we can go ahead and implement the iUbot command. So we're going to go to our class name here. We're going to put a space, a colon, a space, and type iUbot command. Then go ahead and hit Control period and implement the interface. Now Visual Studio is going to create a whole bunch of code automatically for us. But before we start to use that code, let's talk a little bit about what's going on here. We want to create a command which Ubot Studio can use. And the way that we're able to tell Ubot to make this command is to use this iUbot command interface. An interface is a contract between two different systems. This contract is basically an agreement or an understanding of some shared knowledge. This shared knowledge is the code that is created when we implement the interface. So all of this code here, this is the contract. This is the shared knowledge between two different systems, between Ubot Studio and the plugin that you're installing into Ubot Studio. So if you've never worked with interfaces before, then this may all seem very confusing, but just stay with me here. Ubot is saying, hey, if you use this contract and you fill it out kind of like how you would fill out a form, then I will understand what you put into that form. So if you fill out the command name property, for example, then Ubot can understand that because it knows what it is. But anything outside of these bits of shared knowledge, so outside of these 5 properties in this one method here, Ubot is not going to know the existence of anything outside of these. So you can still create your own class members, like methods, properties, fields, and so on, but Ubot will not be able to directly interact with them. Instead, you'll have to use them within other parts of the contract that Ubot can interact with. So for example, I can create a new method down here, like so. And I can write some code in this new method. And that's totally fine. It's totally legal. You know, I can create a field up here. You know, and that's fine too. But the thing is Ubot won't see this, and Ubot won't be able to see this. All Ubot can see is this initial contract. However, we can bring outside members into the contract. So for command name, for example, I could now put some field, and that's totally fine. And then Ubot will see the value of this variable. Likewise, in the execute method, I could put new method, and that's fine, and it'll still work. So let's just get rid of all that. So Ubot is going to ask us what the command name is, and because Ubot created the contract, it knows that this command name property exists. So when we fill in this property, Ubot will be able to display the command name in the Ubot Studio user interface. Hi there. I just wanted to take a brief moment to mention that this video is part of our complete Ubot development course. If you want to learn everything that I know about creating Ubot plugins and be able to add your own functionality into Ubot Studio, then click the link in the description box below or visit us at elitebotters.com. Thanks and enjoy the rest of the video. Now, what we can do is we can click onto our iUbot Studio command and press the F12 key, And what that's going to do is it's going to bring up the signature, the definition of this interface. So it's going to bring up everything that the contract requires us to fulfill. So these 5 properties in this one method are the contract. This is what is required by any class that wishes to implement this Ubot command interface. So another way of saying that is that if you want to create a Ubot command, then you must implement this interface and fulfill the contract by filling in the 5 properties in the method. So we can close that for now, and just another, so I pressed F12 to get there. You can also press Alt F12, and that will open it in line like so. And you may see me do this from time to time to explain things. So that's what's going on if you ever see this window. I'm pressing Alt F12 because F12 will bring it into a new window, and you can hit Escape to get out of it or hit the X. So notice that Visual Studio has already actually filled out these 5 properties and this one method here with this throw new not implemented exception method. And what this means is that when this code runs, an exception will be thrown. And what is an exception? An exception is an error. So what we're going to do now is we're going to fill in this command name, and we're going to call it alert with a capital A, because in Ubot, alert exists with a lowercase a. So we can do it like this. Now I'm going to hit Control-Shift-B, and if you watch down here, you'll see build succeeded. So it built the project. We can then go back into Ubot and add our plugin again. Every time you build a project, you will have to re-add the plugin. Okay, and you saw that what happened there was it hung for a second and then it went away. So let's go ahead and type alert, and we only see Ubots. And why is that? Well, that's because our category has this throw new not implemented exception. And so we don't have a category for our alert command. So let's go ahead and say a category name. Let's say first plugin commands. And let's build this one more time. Okay, and so we have no error and we have no command showing. Even though we filled out the command name and even though we filled out the category name, we're not seeing it there. And if I search for it, we're still not seeing it up here. So this is pretty common, and it's going to happen to you for sure if you start making plugins. When you forget to fill in a part of the contract, like we did with the rest of it here, it should throw an error. But Ubot will not show the error, and your command will not show up in the Ubot Studio interface. And actually, Ubot will stop importing the rest of your plugin. So you may see some commands, but not others. So you may see half of your commands and then all of a sudden not the second half. And the reason for that is probably because you forgot somewhere to fill in a part of the contract. And something that's really common that I do a lot personally is I forget to fill in the parameter definitions, because I start creating a list of parameters and working on that, and I forget to come back and update this. So that's a pretty common thing. So always check to make sure that you've got everything filled in and you don't have any of these not implement exceptions. All right, so moving on, let's go ahead and actually cover the 5 properties in the method. So we already talked a little bit about the command. Obviously, a command name is what these blue names are here. It's the name of your command. It's the name that's going to show up inside of Ubot here. But there's one more thing I want to mention about the command name property, and that's that generally plugin developers will name their commands and functions using what's called proper casing. And that means that the first letter of every word is capitalized and there's spaces between every word, like so. And another thing that plugin developers typically do is they usually preface their command and function names with a unique identifier. So for example, in the Elite Ubot plugin, I preface all of the commands with EB, which stands for Elite Botters, You can see in the Xbrowser plugin, they preface everything with the Xbrowser unique identifier. Now, using these unique identifiers serves two purposes. The first is that it's easy to search for a command and quickly see which plugin is being used. So if I search for something like wait and I start to scroll, you can see that the Elite Ubot plugin has a wait, and it's called EB wait. You can see that Ubot has its own wait without anything in front of it. And you can see that Ubot also has all lowercase. Plugin developers like to use uppercase to differentiate themselves a little bit. Now you can see that Xbrowser also has various wait commands. So if you were looking for a wait command, you could just type wait, and then you could see the list and you could see right away which plugin it belonged to based on this identifier. And so the second purpose of these unique identifiers is avoiding conflicts with the same name. So again, Xbrowser might have its own wait command. Now they have various like wait for element, but it might just be called Xbrowser wait instead of wait for DOM ready. And then Elite Ubot could have its Elite Ubot wait, and they would be technically different. Whereas if we were to name them the same and we were to both just say wait, then that would cause a conflict. And so that's a good reason to use unique identifiers. Now we're not going to be using them, at least not in the beginning of the course. We're definitely not going to be worrying about that too much right now, but it's something to take a mental note of for later. And you'll see that the categories, which is the next thing we want to talk about, this category property here, this is what shows up under the commands for the command, and for the functions, it shows up under the parameters list here. Now, we usually will preface the categories as well with something. In this case, I chose Elite, the full word, and Xbrowser once again just chose Xbrowser in this particular case. Again, it just helps to avoid conflicts. You don't want two different plugins using the same category name. And it also makes it easier to find when you're scrolling through the toolbox here. You can just see it's very obvious. These are all of the Xbrowser commands. These are all of the Elite Ubot commands. All right, so moving on, we now have the parameter definitions property. And this is where we can define the parameters to be used in the command. So real quick, I'll show you what a parameter is. We just type alert. This message is a parameter. It has a name, which is just message, and it has a value, and the value is whatever the user inputs, like my message. And we can get the value of the parameter from the user, but we're not going to worry about that in this video. We'll talk about that soon though. So because we're not going to worry about filling out any parameters right now, this is asking for an IEnumerable of Ubot parameter definition. I'm not going to go over like IEnumerable. So for the most part in this course, whenever I refer to this, I'm just going to call it a list just for simplicity's sake. So just take a mental note of that I will just be calling this a list from now on, most likely. So in this case, what we can do is we can just give it a list. And that's the reason why I'm just going to call it a list for simplicity's sake, is because for the most part, you're just going to be using lists with this anyway. So just go ahead and give it a new list of Ubot parameter definition, like so. And then that's totally fine. So what's happening here is they're asking us for some parameters and we're giving them an empty list. So there will be no parameters. So the isContainer property is going to tell Ubot whether or not the command is a container command. And what a container command is a command that can hold other commands. So a loop, for example, we can put other commands inside of this. And that's because it's a container command. It contains this drag commands here, which allow us to drag other commands within it. So in this case, we're going to be creating our own version of the alert command. And so it is not a container. So we can just type false. Now the Ubot version property allows you to target a specific Ubot version. And targeting standard will allow this command to be used in all Ubot versions. Targeting the professional edition of Ubot will allow only professional and developer versions and will not allow standard. targeting developer will only allow developer editions to use this command, and standard and professional editions will not see this command in their toolbox. So that's what this is. You can specify a target Ubot version, and this is an enumeration, so you can just type Ubot version dot, and it's going to come up with developer, and if you type S, you'll get standard, and you can see professional right here. Just as a rule of thumb, you're generally going to want to use standard in most cases, unless it changes Ubot's appearance of some sort, then you need to use developer because that's the white label edition of Ubot. So standard and professional, they have the normal looking Ubot. Anytime you want to change anything that makes Ubot look like something else, then you need to use developer. And then rarely, but sometimes you may want to use professional if you're maybe targeting something that uses like multi-threading specifically, or some specific professional on up version that's not related to Ubot's appearance. But for the most part, this is going to be standard. And then sometimes if you're messing with the appearance, you'll want to set this to be developer. That's just like a basic guideline to follow. And finally, we have the execute method. The execute method is called when your command runs inside of Ubot. So if I were to step and we see that right now the alert command is running, in fact, let me stop that real quick. We can see that the alert command is running right now. So when the command gets executed, what's actually getting executed is whatever is in here. Basically, that's what's going on there. Now there are two parameters that get passed to the execute method. One is this interface of iUbot Studio, and that allows us to do things like get and set data types, along with some other things, and we're definitely going to talk more about this later. But for now, we're trying to keep things simple. And the other is a parameter dictionary. So it's this dictionary string named parameters. And so this is going to allow us to get the values of the parameters that we define in the parameter definitions list up here. We're going to be covering this soon in more detail, but in this video, we're not going to be using either of these. We're just going to keep things simple. All right, so now that we know a little bit about the basics of how a command works, let's go ahead and make this command actually do something. In this case, we're just going to have it alert hello name. So in my case, it would be hello Nick. So I'm going to type mbox, hit tab. It's just a shortcut for message box. And I'm just going to type hello Nick. And we can just get rid of this forms like so, and it should work. And let's go ahead and compile that using Control-Shift-B. Open up Ubot and import it. And as you can see, we now have a new section called First Plugin Commands. Inside of that, we have the alert, and if we search the toolbox, we can see both alerts. Ours has a capital A. And we don't have any parameters, so we just drag that out, press run, and it says hello Nick. Cool. Now let's go ahead and make a basic function. We've covered what a basic command is. Let's go ahead and make a basic function. We're going to call this getName. So I'm going to hit Shift F2 and call it getName.cs. And I'm not going to implement from Ubot, or I'm not going to bring in the namespace Ubot plugin. Instead, I'm just going to straight up try to implement the iUbot function interface. I'm going to type I with a capital U as well, bot function, and hit Control dot. And as you can see down here, IntelliSense is telling me that it thinks I want to use this Ubot plugin. So you may or may not have this feature, but this is probably how I'm going to do things from now on, because it's redundant for me to type the namespace when I can just type this instead. So I'm going to do that, hit Control dot, and implement the interface. So you may or may not have that. I don't remember if it's a plugin that I installed or some feature that I turned on. If you don't have that, just simply bring in this namespace, but I probably won't be doing this anymore. Just for reference, I will just be typing out the interface name. So as you can see, a function is actually really similar to a command. We have things like the function name, the category, the parameter definitions, the Ubot version, and the execute method. Actually, the only difference here is that we just simply have these two new properties. One is called return value and one is called return value type. So before we talk about return value, let's actually look at return value type. So this is actually going to return an enum. As you can see, if you hover over this Ubot type, it's an enum. So it's an enumeration, which means that we can just type Ubot type and look at the options because we basically need to select an option. So let's go ahead and type out Ubot type and hit dot. As you can see, it brings up these options for us. So we only have these 4 options that we can work with when we're referring to Ubot types. So as you can see, we can return a string, a Ubot list, a Ubot table, or a Ubot variable. Now a string is simply a string in C#. A list is just a list of string. A table is a 2-dimensional string array, and we will cover that, don't worry if you don't know what that is. And a variable is also a string. So all of these are actually pretty simple to work with. The table is by far going to be the most complex, but it's not difficult. So I do have a way of breaking this down and showing you basically what this is. And we'll talk about that in one of the upcoming videos, like I said. So we're not gonna worry about it today. So now that we know what our options are, we can determine what type the return value is going to be. In most cases, you're just gonna return a string. So it's actually pretty simple in most cases. So let's go ahead and return a string because we're returning a name, right? We're saying get name. So we're gonna return a string, really easy. And now for the return value, we're going to want to create a field and then basically pass the field into the return value property. So to create a field, we come up here and we just type private and we can type, string because it's going to be a string because the return value type we chose is a string. So that's why we're setting the type to be string here. And we can put return value like so. You can put the underscore or not if you want. This is sort of like a backing field to this property. And so for that reason, I'm putting the underscore there. But any kind of naming preferences that like your naming preferences or your naming conventions might be slightly different. So, underscore or not, don't worry about that. But I will be using that for things that are backing these properties. I will be using underscores, basically. You'll see me use them. So all we need to do is create this private string return value. And now what we can do is we can actually just say, what do we want to return? We want to return this field here, the value of this field here, which right now is basically empty. And the way that we give this a value is simply down here in the execute method. So let's actually just do that right now. Let's say that the return value equals a name. In this case, for me, it's just going to be Nick. And it's as simple as that. So when this runs, it's going to set the return value to be whatever string you put here. And then it's going to send this back to Ubot because this is a function, remember? So it's going to return data. So this is where it's returning it basically. And now we can go ahead and fill in the rest of this function here. One thing to note is that when you're using functions, they are generally prefaced with a $sign. So we bring up Ubot here. Let's see what I'm talking about. See all these $signs in front of them? This isn't like explicitly required, but it's a good idea. I'm not sure if some things won't work or not, but as far as I know, it's not explicitly required, but just put a $sign here. It's just a naming convention, and that'll ensure everything works 100% properly. So we're just going to call this get name like so. And for the category, we're going to say first plugin functions. And we don't have any parameters, so we can go ahead and say a new list of Ubot parameter definition, like so. And for our Ubot version, we could just say standard. And everything looks good so far. All right, so let's go ahead and test this out. All right, so let's just get rid of that. And instead, let's use Ubot's alert because I actually have the message parameter in it. And now we can find our function here that says get name. Hit OK, press run, and it says my name. Cool. So in this video, we created a basic command and function. These are the basic building blocks of a Ubot Studio plugin. And in future videos, we're going to expand upon this knowledge to create more complex and better commands and functions. So I'll see you in the next video.